Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
I'm Kirsty Bedford, journalist, editor and travel writer.
And I'm Belinda Jackson, author, travel journalist and columnist, and we're your weekly co-hosts. Welcome back to our first official podcast for 2024 following our fantastic summer series. We hope you enjoyed them, and if not, go back and take a listen. We covered some of our best interviews as well as the best, most bizarre travel moments from some of our guests. That vomiting comedian from Brent Hill from Tourism Fiji talked about. It was absolutely hilarious.
Oh no, my gosh, I laugh every time I hear that. And I've listened to it multiple times, still laughing. And we also take you to Spain and Italy. I mean, who doesn't want to go back to Spain and Italy? And of course, last week we talked about two of Victoria's favourite holiday playgrounds, Mornington Peninsula and Phillip Island, where we've both holidayed for years, but I think Phillip Island wins for nature, Belle.
Yeah, okay, but the peninsula has incredible nature and definitely wins for food and wine. But we'll let you decide, so jump back to the previous episode if you missed it and let us know which one did it better. So you can drop us a little line at hello@theworldawaits.au. And as we record this, I'm just back from the peninsula, and so no bias. But I'm packing for another great part of Victoria up in the high country. As you may know from listening to us, we both love a good hike.
Yes, and I did loads of hiking over the break. So in last week's episode, I did talk about some of the best places to hike on Phillip Island, one of the best places to holiday. But I also took my teens back to Auckland too to see my mum, and we went to Waiheke Island, which is a 45-minute ferry ride from the city, and hiked there. And it's a real playground for the rich and famous over there. I actually didn't realise how much so. But anyway, you can read more about that when my story comes out in Vacations and Travel next month. But back to the hike, there are loads of hikes you can do on the island, and it's very, very steep, which means two things: great workout and, of course, amazing views. And those houses, those mansions carved into the cliff. And Waiheke would also win when it comes to wineries because there's 30 of them on that one island.
Oh my God, 30 on that tiny little island. So you get a thigh workout, you get to perv in people's fabulous houses and drink wine, especially that Otago Pinot Noir. So now, what have we got coming up this week, Kirsty?
We are revealing the world's most powerful passports, and it is a thing. The Henley Passport Index is an annual list based on data from the International Air Transport Association, which shows which are the most powerful passports to hold. And it matters because how powerful your passport is means you have more visa-free travel.
Yeah, so the index includes 199 different passports and 227 different travel destinations, and it's updated monthly. So this year there was an unprecedented tie for the top passports, which are from France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Singapore and Spain. And holders of those passports can visit 194 destinations without requiring a visa around the globe. And in second place were South Korea, Finland and Sweden, who can visit 193 destinations visa-free.
Australia rated 6th with 189 visa-free destinations, along with New Zealand, Poland and the Czech Republic. And the worst passports to hold were Pakistan, Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan, which means if you held one of those passports, there are only 28 countries you can visit without getting a visa.
So historically, Japan and Singapore have dominated the list. So this shows a trend of more accessibility around the world, and things are improving for many countries. The UAE was the biggest climber, adding 106 destinations since 2014. And Ukraine and China are also among the top 5 countries with the most improved rankings.
But there is a big gap between the top passports being able to visit 194 countries visa-free and the bottom only with 28 visa-free countries. And we'll put the full list in the show notes.
You're listening to The World Awaits. We'd love it if you could leave us a rating and review on your favourite podcast platform.
This week, I'm chatting with Andrew Conway, who's been travelling and writing about it for 40 years. Even so, he only recently visited both poles for the first time, and he talks to me about what you're likely to see in both Antarctica and the Arctic, and what you can do to ensure you play your part in ensuring the protection of these fragile bucket list destinations. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you, Kirsty. A privilege, pleasure.
It's so fantastic to have you on The World Awaits. Let's start by just explain to our listeners a little bit about your background and how specifically you got into travel.
I just did a very quick calculation before we started, and I worked out I've been doing this job as a journalist and a travel writer for 44 years, which is even I was shocked by how many years I've put into this. Look, I've worked on major newspapers, magazines, websites, actually on 3 continents. I trained in the United Kingdom and did my journalism training there. Then I came to Australia and spent half my life in Australia working for some of the major newspapers and magazines here. And then I went to the United States and I did 12 years in the US, again, editing travel and lifestyle magazines and websites. So hence my slightly mixed accent. I worked for the Australian, I worked for the Sun Herald, and it was during my time at the Sun Herald in the 1980s, back at when the Australian travel industry was kind of in its infancy. In 1984, the Paul Hogan throw a shrimp on the Barbie thing, and my editor came to me, and I traveled extensively on my own, and he said, I'd like to beef up the travel section. I see a commercial opportunity here. Would you do it? And I said to him, wait, he said, have a think about it. And I said, wait, you want to pay me? I just want to get this right. You want to pay me to travel and write about it? I said, I don't need to think about it. I am saying yes right now. And it was a moment of fate that put me on a trajectory that's lasted for the rest of my life. And I would say a fortunate life, having been able to travel to many parts of the world and report back on it at a time too when travel was very much open. We didn't have global pandemics. I mean, there were obviously sporadic wars from time to time, but generally a sort of what I consider a safer time and less troubled time. So I feel very, very fortunate in that. And the 2 poles, which the Arctic and the Antarctic, which we're going to talk about today, had largely eluded me. Back in the day, going to the Arctic and to the Antarctic was a very time-consuming thing. You had to commit a substantial amount of time. It was not done in any sort of kind of real comfort. It was done on Russian icebreakers. And I just back in the day wasn't able to commit the time to polar exploration. And as I've got older and my life has changed and work is easing up a little bit, I now have more time to do it. And of course, expedition travel, particularly in the polar regions, has exploded. I would say it's probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing sector of the travel industry.
I want to touch on that some more, because particularly this expedition idea of expedition cruising, and a lot of people might not understand the differences between the certain types of cruising. So can you talk a little bit about that and the expedition cruises that you went on, and what does it mean by and why what does that mean when you're on an expedition cruise ship?
I'm going to start this by actually taking the word cruise and cruising out of the conversation. An expedition voyage to the Arctic or the Antarctic is not a cruise. I really have to stress this. It's not a cruise from your traditional Mediterranean passenger perspective. This is all about small ship expedition travel. You are on board a ship, so I guess per se you are cruising. You're on water for much of the time. Obviously, there are tremendous shore excursions to be had too. But the ships, so I have been very privileged to have been to both the Arctic and the Arctic within the same year, just about. So last year I traveled to the Antarctic. I did an extended trip. I thought, if I'm going to go, this is a bucket list destination. I want to do the most I can with this one trip. So I did a 23-day expedition with an Australian company, Aurora Expeditions, Australian owned and operated. It's been going for about 30 years. And it was co-founded by Greg Mortimer, one of Australia's greatest mountaineers and adventurers, and his wife, Margaret, back in 1991. So they've got tremendous experience in the field. They're one of the pioneers of expedition travel. And Greg himself has tremendous experience, particularly in the Antarctic with his travels there, but also the Arctic. So I did a 23-day trip to the Antarctic, Antarctic Peninsula, onto South Georgia, which was just in the subantarctic, which was just mind-blowingly special, and then onto the Falkland Islands, actually in the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War, which I grew up with. So there was some sort of full circle moment there. About a year later, I was very lucky to be invited back to go to the Arctic, and I felt like I knew what the Antarctic was. I'd never been, but I'd seen so many David Attenborough documentaries, and I sort of felt like I knew the Antarctic, and I knew absolutely nothing about the Arctic. And I felt like I went to the Arctic as a bit of an open book. And I have to say that the Arctic is one of the most special places I've ever been to in my life. I just can't, it's one of it actually is a place that makes me quite emotional, because on one hand, it's so beautiful in a really sort of barren, desolate, undiscovered kind of way. And yet at the same time, it's so fragile and so vulnerable. And, climate change is sort of the talk of the day, as it should be. Well, I can tell you without any hesitation that I feel like I have stood at the very front line of climate change by going to the Arctic, because we explored in the Arctic. That was a 15-day trip. And I'll explain, we went to the Norwegian Arctic. So we started out of Oslo to Longyearbyen, which was the port of entry. And then we did a 15-day circumnavigation of Spitsbergen, the largest island in Svalbard. And because we were chasing weather, and this is why expedition travel is not a cruise, you have to expect the unexpected. Our entire itinerary got changed because of the weather and sea ice. And we had to go in a reverse circumnavigation rather than a clockwise navigation. And it changed the entire nature of the expedition. But there's a caveat to the magnificence of the Arctic, because it is disappearing before our very eyes. And I know we'll get into this a little later, but literally sea ice is melting. These vast ice caps are melting. They have waterfalls pouring off them. The temperatures were the highest they've ever been while we were there. We were walking around in t-shirts and shorts. We were swimming in water there off beaches. This should not be happening in the Arctic at all. So, there's this sort of tremendous sense of education, this tremendous sense of conservation, this tremendous sense of sustainability that we need to put into Arctic and Antarctic polar travel. But then at the same time, are we sort of part of the problem of being there? Because we're sailing around, albeit with, world-class environmental credentials and biofuels and, this sort of concept of treading lightly. Aurora Expeditions and I would like, some of its competitors are working incredibly hard to make sure that their footprint is as minimal as possible, while still trying to educate people who have the money to go there to sort of become ambassadors, much like this, so that we can talk about it and bring the tales of the Arctic and the Antarctic back to us and sort of spread the word about the great things and about some of the more fragile things and more vulnerable things that are going on there.
Yes, and I was in Norway in October, and we were walking on a to a glacier, and I understand what you're talking about that on a slightly different level, but because there were markers obviously of this glacier and how much it was shrinking, and while it was truly remarkable seeing it, it was quite devastating. And knowing that they were saying to us, take lots of photos because possibly next time you're here, you will never see it again. So let's talk about that. So what do the cruise ships, what are they actually doing? And what can you do as a traveller to these? Because like you said, this is just a really bucket list, incredible destinations to visit. And like you were saying, particularly for Arctic, for you, it was, and for someone so well-travelled to be saying that it was really one of the most incredible places you've ever been to. So what are some of the things, and can we really make any change?
Oh, I'm a great believer in that we can always make change, globally as the global village and also individually. I think it's twofold. I think the Aurora expeditions, and I can only speak to Aurora really because I traveled to both polar regions with the same company. Different ships. They have two small expedition ships in the fleet. One is named after Greg, the Greg Mortimer, and the other one is named after one of the greatest ocean conservationists on the planet, Dr. Sylvia Earle. And I would encourage people, your listeners, if you do nothing else today, but Google Dr. Sylvia Earle. She is the David Attenborough of oceans. I don't think she's overly well known in Australia, but the work that she has put in, she's into her 90s now, the work that she has put into ocean conservation and continues to put in, it is unbelievable. It's really second to none. So it's interesting that Aurora has sort of gone into partnership to some degree and named one of the ships after Sylvia Earle, and she's very much sort of, a partner in the delivery of the experience from an education perspective. So the Aurora and these other expedition companies are putting millions and millions of dollars into making sure that their environmental credentials are world class. So Aurora it's 100% carbon neutral. It's about to achieve B Corp certification, which is about creating a business that's verified on its performance and accountability and transparencies on everything across the board, from both within the company and without, on sustainability side of things. The two ships have this Ulstein X-bow, which lowers fuel consumption and fewer emissions. It's got amazing sort of energy and water and waste management systems on board, world-class expedition teams to provide the education side of things. There's a comprehensive citizen science program, which we'll get to, because that's what expeditioners, and I don't want to call them passengers, they're not passengers, they are expeditioners that go on these voyages, and they work with these women in conservation. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on in the background with Aurora and with all of these small expedition ships that travel to these areas. But something like citizen science. So now citizen science, and I hate to say it, but the very word science, I have failed every science exam and test in my life. I do not have a science bone in my body or in my brain. This is very different. This is living, what I term living science. This is about getting involved personally on board the ships and working with the naturalists and the expedition team on board, who are experts in their different chosen fields, and taking part in occasional, they're scheduled fairly sort of regularly through the voyage, where you go out on deck, or you go in a Zodiac, or you walk on shore, and you take part in collecting and gathering data effectively from the water, from the air, from the land, taking it back to the ship, analyzing the information in a very simple sort of basic way, and then with the help of the experts on board, sharing this data from the natural world with professional scientists around the world. So the Citizen Science Program on Aurora covers 8 specific topics, and I'll guide them through you very, very quickly. That expeditioners can join in, and it's incredibly enjoyable, and you learn so much, and then you bring the information back, and then it gets stored and it gets analyzed and it gets shared around the world, and it's sort of creating this global database, I guess, that is ongoing. It's a living thing, and even though you play a very small part in it, there's definitely a sense of I'm actually doing something good here. And that can sound very esoteric, but just that sense of I'm here, I'm privileged to experience what I'm seeing, but I'm also trying to sort of tread lightly and give back and sort of pay it forward, if you like. And these science programs, so we're talking about whales. Every whale can be identified. So we spend time identifying whales, taking photographs, and we were seeing a vast number of whales not so much in the Antarctic, but definitely in the Antarctic. We did microplastic surveys, a major problem. You think that the poles are pristine and clean and untouched, and they are not. The Arctic Ocean is connected to every other ocean on the planet, and unfortunately, the crap that human beings throw off ships and off our beaches and out of our waterways ends up in the Arctic and the Antarctic. So beach cleanups we did, seabird surveys, we did cloud observations, information that's then shared with NASA in the United States. We did phytoplankton. We did observing plants and animals, and Aurora's just about to launch a new one, an 8th citizen science project called IC. It's about mapping global pollution and maritime hazards. Ships, I'm not talking about necessarily cruise ships, but they're part of the challenge. Ships are create some of the biggest hazards on the planet for marine life, particularly whales. So I can't stress tremendous amount of work going on in the background that I feel mitigates to some degree the challenge of being there and leaving a footprint, although the aim is to leave as minimal a footprint. And I can't tell you the biosecurity measures and the measures that are taken to protect the wildlife and the flora and the fauna and everything else are very, very strict. They're under very strict regulations. So yeah, it's a challenge on one hand, but a lot of work is being done. And without education, we can't save something if you don't know what it is. And again, I guess it's quite a lofty kind of ambition, but if you don't know something or haven't experienced something, it becomes much harder to try to protect it or preserve it or save it. So I think this concept of somehow carefully taking people to these really fragile places, vulnerable places that are really the last sort of frontiers, if you like, on the planet, does come with a major effort to try to protect and preserve it for future generations.
I think that's a really good point, because absolutely, of course, if you're not living any situation, it's very hard to be an advocate for it, and that really does explain sort of where the balance can come in of and why it is important for people to go, but do it in the right way. What were some of the most remarkable experiences that you had, just outside of citizen science, but just in those. I mean, seeing penguins, seeing the whales. Well, what were some of the most remarkable things that that will stay with you from those trips?
Let's talk Antarctic, which, as I say, I think people have a fairly good understanding that there is the peninsula, which is a very tiny part of the Antarctic continent, obviously. The monumental element of it, I had misunderstood just how big, in every sense of the word, and Antarctica is, both on a geological scale. We're talking in vast mountains ranges and icebergs the size I can't of container ships, bigger, 3 times the size of container ships, and ice caps, and then the sheer scale of the wildlife, where you'd sort of get in the Zodiac every day, twice a day, and be taken off the ship and be deposited on a beach, and you'd sort of say to the one of the expedition team, well, where are we going? And they'd say, well, just sort of go. I mean, obviously they escorted us for safety reasons, but then suddenly you're on a beach and you are literally surrounded by hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of emperor and king penguins, and a whole variety of other penguins that there's a whole family of penguins there. Fur seals, elephant seals, the bird life. These are very dynamic environments. They're very harsh environments. You think that nothing could kind of exist there, and they're very harsh to human, to people, but to wildlife that have adapted to living there. Going on to South Georgia, this sort of Garden of Eden where we sailed up towards it, and the water suddenly became alive with penguins like porpoising out of the waters, and the sky is just filling with bird life. And I think I saw a documentary with David Attenborough, saying that South Georgia is really, in his mind, the most special place on the planet, and not to go to Antarctica and not to do South Georgia, I think people would be doing themselves a disservice, although there's long distances between them. And then, Kirsty, the Arctic. I mentioned earlier that we had to change the whole route of our expedition because of sea ice that was too heavy to the north of us. So we went anti-clockwise around Spitsbergen. That took us on a whole different trajectory. We had 10 polar bear sightings, 2 of which included cubs and kills. We saw Arctic foxes and cubs. We saw walruses in the water, hauled out on beaches. We saw whales. We saw beluga, fin, minke. And one about midnight, and because we're in the land of the midnight sun, where it's 24 hours of daylight, a blue whale came and swam around the ship for about half an hour, as if nothing had ever happened. We weren't there. It was actually quite inquisitive. It was definitely checking us out. A blue whale is the largest creature, the largest animal that has ever existed on the planet. And it swam around. It is blue, by the way. It swam around the ship, and then it went into this deep dive. We saw reindeer. We saw masses of wildflowers, and skies filled with these extraordinary birds. So it sounds sort of trite to talk about life-changing and perspective-altering, but the Antarctic and the Arctic, I believe, are 2 places on the planet that can make you rethink your own values on life and your position in life and us as human beings, and to make us think about what are we doing to this planet, and I mentioned Sylvia Earle. Google Dr. Sylvia Earle. but she's the David Attenborough of oceans, and to hear her or read her comments about our dependence as the human race on the ocean, and we call it planet Earth, but 70% of the planet is water and surrounded by water. It should be called planet ocean. And if we don't start really to focus on what's happening in our oceans around us, particularly in the polar regions, I don't know. I think things are not going to be particularly good for future generations. I don't want to sound sort of dour about it, but certainly I think the Antarctic is in better shape than the Arctic. The Arctic, we felt, and the expedition team was talking about how it's changed. They see it year on year on year, and they've said that the Arctic is changing rapidly and not for the better. So, great food for thought. These expedition voyages to the polar regions are three things. They're about education, they are about conservation, and they're about sustainability. And they're three big subjects. But when you're working and living every day with these incredible scientific experts and with the expedition team who are crack people in their chosen fields, it is enlightening. With human, very, very human perspectives. So this is not a cruise. This is about discovering the sort of central tenets of what this planet is all about and our place in it. I can't stress that too highly.
Absolutely. Gosh, that was really insightful and really great to hear from someone who's been to both in such a close proximity time and also recently. So thank you so much for that. We'll have a slight change of pace now because we end all of our interviews on this question. What's the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to you on your travels?
You're going to hate me because I'm going to stay in Antarctica.
I thought you might.
Can't get it out of my head. I went polar snorkeling. There is such a thing. It exists. You join a program, and every day you can go out, you don a kind of spaceship sort of dry suit, not a wetsuit, it's a dry suit. So you're dry inside, completely insulated, and you go polar snorkeling with your guide in a group. And we snorkeled around icebergs, and we snorkeled in bays that had elephant seals and leopard seals, and we snorkeled in bays in Cooper Bay, which is on South Georgia. The Zodiac took us into a rock pool that was filled with baby fur seals, and we polar snorkeled with baby fur seals crawling, all the most inquisitive animals, and they were crawling all over us. And that, I felt, was one of the most wonderful moments of my life. Definitely. It's a tough thing to do, the polar snorkeling. It comes with challenges. It'll definitely push you out of your comfort zone, but it takes you to places that are unimaginable and unseeable potentially from a Zodiac or on shore. So if you've got the nerve to do it, I would recommend polar snorkeling for sure.
That's fantastic. Look, thank you so much for your time today, Andrew, and it would be great to we'll have a chat again, maybe in months to come and see where you've travelled to next.
I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity.
That was fascinating. And Andrew's right. People don't support a cause that they don't understand. Although part of me thinks that travel to the Arctic and Antarctic need to be curtailed simply for the preservation of those, incredible locations. It's a really difficult balance between tourism and conservation, but it's one that we have to keep talking about.
Our tip this week is about the safest places to travel according to US multinational Berkshire Hathaway Travel Protection. So the research is pretty extensive and actually breaks it down into exactly why they're the safest places and also safest places from certain angles, such as terrorist or safety for LGBTQ travellers. So we're obviously not going to go extensively into it, but we'll give you a very good summary, and then, we'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, so we'll get to the full list soon, but it says that it's clear that travellers think that Canada, Northern Europe, Australia and New Zealand are pretty safe. Interesting, given that we are often portrayed as not so safe due to the sharks, the snakes, the spiders. I mean, yeah.
I love how people always often say to me too, "Oh, you're from New Zealand, there's nothing deadly in New Zealand." And I'm like, yep, as a child, we freely ran through long grass in the height of summer. Not that summers were the same as they are in Australia, but there you go. And also, what about Canadian bears? Why aren't people concerned about Canadian bears, but they're worried about sharks and snakes and deadly spiders in Australia? I mean, would you go walking in the woods alone in Canada?
Well, I don't know, but regardless, Canada was voted the number one safest place in the world, followed by Switzerland, Norway, Ireland, and then the Netherlands.
And next was the UK, Portugal, Denmark and Iceland. And in 10th place, Australia, followed by New Zealand. And Australia actually dropped from number 4 last year. And guess what it said was the explanation of why.
Oh, go on, tell me. What made us more scary?
Jellyfish. Jellyfish, crocodiles. This is what it says in the report. Jellyfish, crocodiles, sharks, poisonous insects and snakes. And it says, and I quote, "The continent and its waters host wildlife that merit awe and respect in equal measures."
I think travellers simply need to toughen up a bit. I mean, for New Zealand, it says to watch out for sheep. Are sheep dangerous? Like, seriously, do you have dangerous sheep in New Zealand, Kirsty?
Look, I've been chased by cows before when I've been walking on,
Tell me you've been chased by a sheep.
But definitely not a sheep. So I've never been chased by a sheep. And when I lived in Auckland, there's a working farm called One Tree Hill, which is beautiful, actually. It's a beautiful walk. There's it's a working farm, as I said, as well, and it's a beautiful park. And I used to walk the dog or run the dog through there, and I was chased by cows multiple times.
I think maybe it's a weather thing, because it says to pack for all seasons. And interestingly, mature survey respondents rated Iceland and South Korea as their top destinations, which I found really curious. Mature travellers were the only major group to list South Korea amongst their 10 safest countries, but they think South Korea is really safe. And look, it is scrupulously honest, and it doesn't have many things that will bite you. Does have a couple of dodgy mushrooms kicking around. So Korea, that was a bit random, wasn't it?
Mm. Meanwhile, parents responding to the survey voted for Canada and Belgium as the most safe destinations for families.
And for LGBTQ travellers, the top destinations are Belgium, again, Ireland and China, which is, that last one's a weird one, especially when you consider, places like San Francisco and Sydney. I know that they're not countries, but, they are renowned for their inclusive culture.
Yeah, I agree. I found that one a little odd too.
Toronto was just kind of strange. Anyway.
Yeah, I did find that strange as well. While it seems that the world's safest countries don't and shouldn't really change, that's what it says, I'm not really entirely sure why, there's actually been significant movement in this year's rankings. For instance, over the last year, Japan rebounded from 19th to 12th place, while Denmark fell from 2nd to 8th place. Having just come back from Denmark, I felt incredibly safe. But anyway, Brazil made the biggest...
But it's kind of weird. Come on, they just got an Australian queen, so we're going to be safe there. Like, Mary, right? She's going to look after us. Mary will save us. Okay.
Oh my gosh, there's so much I could talk to about that. I went to one of I went into their official, palace. It was incredible. It's so beautiful. Right, let's move on though. Brazil made the biggest leap, jumping from 42nd safest country up to 15th place, with high marks for women travellers as well as people of colour and the LGBTQ community.
Oh, well, there we go. So there's the safest place. I mean, of course it's going to change because geopolitical structure of the world changes, a war breaks out somewhere. I mean, Ukraine has been off limits and around, the perimeter of Russia and places like that changed dramatically. And
I agree.
But however, I'm still laughing about the sheep and being
Testimonies of men chased by a sheep and
dangerous New Zealand. So if you do want to check your own safety, we'll put the list in the show notes for you.
Next week, I'm talking to Adventure World Managing Director Neil Rogers about the demand for ethical travel, what type of experiences this actually includes, and how you can do it. And you'll want to listen to the end because if you listen through till his most bizarre travel moment, there's a celebrity that he's often mistaken for.
You know what? I Googled it. I'm not going to give it away, but I Googled it. I cannot unsee now. It's incredible. And if you would like to help support our production costs, you can buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com, which is ko-fi.com/The World Awaits. And for like a mere $5, we can continue to bring you inspirational travel interviews with the world's best. I mean, Kirsty doesn't even drink coffee, but she'll do she'll do anything for a chai latte. And mine's a skinny flat white, thanks, because Melbourne. That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods. And where can people find you, Kirsty?
I'm at Kirsty Writes on Instagram. That's Kirstie Writes, WRITES. And where can people find you, Belle?
You can find me at globalsalsa.com or on Insta at global_salsa.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.